Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation to talk about tigers. You have a rich legacy about tigers. The Mysore state has a very rich legacy about preservation of wildlife. I'm delighted to be talking to you, and I'm sure the audience will be delighted to listen to you, because not many people know about your interest in wildlife conservation. And of course, they have read a lot about Mysore state and the legacy of Mysore state in preserving Karnataka's wildlife. So thank you very much for joining, sir.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me, Sanjay. And of course, you've heard about all the great work from the Holématthi Foundation, and then, of course, all the books you have read has helped us further understand conservation and where we should stand. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here today on what is World Tiger Day, and what is perhaps the most crucial animal to save if we are to save the entire ecosystem here in India. So thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to a very fruitful discussion.
Thank you, sir. Sir, my first question is, or it's more like a discussion between us. On this International Tiger Day, would you like to share any special moment, tiger moment, which you have experienced?
Yeah, I've had good fortune of having quite a few good moments, thanks to obviously being so close to two very big tiger reserves, three if you count BR Hills as well, here in Mysore. My favorite was definitely one that I recall always is when I was very small. That time you could still stay at Sungatkatte. Now, of course, it's become the anti-poaching camp. And we were in a morning drive, and just before the backwaters, I happened to be at that time quite young, so I could sit on the gearbox in the gypsy, and it was still the gypsies of those days.
Okay.
So I was sitting on the gearbox, and we saw a mother and two cubs which were hardly, very, very young. And there was a tusker down the road as well, and she managed to cross the road with one of her cubs, and the other one got a bit frightened and stayed the other side. So she got really, I suppose, worked up a bit, and you could hear her growling and all, because one of her cubs was calling this side, and she was on the other side of the road with her other cub, and she couldn't leave that cub and go this side to carry this cub over as well, because that tusker was down the road.
Oh, okay.
So it was, her, of course, she was in a bit of distress, but a wonderful sighting. And I remember that because that was the first time I was able to sort of realize the situation I was in, and being in the presence of the animal and understanding what it was at such close quarters. I had, of course, seen many times before, but that was the first time I really had
Saw
a good
tigers.
sighting. I had a good sighting wherein I was old enough to understand what I was seeing.
Oh, nice.
And at the same time remember the moment beyond just a fleeting glimpse. I had seen tigers before, but never like this, right in front of the car.
So you saw our national animal and today's national heritage animal together, and that's the first remembrance of such a wonderful sight. It must have been, sir.
No, it was, a very wonderful sight, and I had the good fortune to have many more over the years. Both Nagarhole and Bandipur have given me tremendous sightings, and even at BR Hills, I had the good fortune of seeing a tiger once. So it's been always, never gets old, no matter how many times you see it. And now, because of Kabini being so well, now an abundance of tigers, pretty much on every drive you'll see a tiger, which never used to happen before.
Okay.
So out of every 3 drives, you'll probably have a sighting of a cat now, and especially Kabini side of Nagarhole. So it's never ever gets old, and something I keenly look forward to whenever I have the time to drive down from here.
Okay. Sir, Mysore state, or Mysore as a state, has a rich legacy of wildlife preservation. Way back, the Venugopala Game Sanctuary was set up, which is currently, or the present day, Madipur Tiger Reserve. The Jagra Valley Game Sanctuary, which is currently called as the Badra Tiger Reserve. So many other, state forests were set up, which are equivalent to reserve forests set up by the British. And then as early as in 1931, hunting of tigers was regulated by the Mysore state. It had such a wonderful legacy of wildlife preservation. Why do you think the rulers of Mysore had such a interest in forests and wildlife?
I think from a very long time, of course, the fact is that apart from the northeastern jungles, I think Mysore Now Karnataka has, I think, the longest stretch of contiguous jungle, which no other state has. And a testament to that is the fact that we have one of the highest numbers of tigers, if not the highest in this country. And some of it certainly goes back to that time. We cannot hide behind the fact that certainly hunting went on and it was part of the culture then, but we must also understand that globally, even Western countries only understood that we were planetary stewards only in the 60s.
Yeah.
So that's 30 years before that already you had an understanding that reserve forests especially, there's a conservation element to it. And even though hunting was still allowed, as you said, it was regulated, and they understood what means and how much of hunting can be happen if the ecosystem has to be preserved as it is. One must also understand, and I believe they had the tiger blocks at each individual place, and they knew the numbers in each place and what could sustain a certain block and the number of tigers therein, and then how many could be hunted and how many could be taken as trophies. And I believe also there was a system of taxation and knowing to get the tag for hunting the tiger or be it any other animal. Beyond and above that also, of course, the idea that human laws and whatever we have envisioned in our urban sphere or even the rural sphere does not exist within the wild sphere, in the forest sphere. It is its own, only nature's laws apply there. And so conserving and understanding that to a certain degree required maintenance of populations. At that time there was certainly a much higher population of tigers, and even nuisance animals had some the tags would be given out then to get rid of them as well. So all of these things were very well functioning and a well oiled system. We know from many records that plantation drives took over, and unlike in many cases today, there was actually planting of trees that were required and part of the ecosystem there. There was an understanding of what trees went into the system and what trees did not belong here. And when it came to animals and hunting of them, of course, it was very much regulated from 31, and even before that, I don't think there was active participation as high as other states in the north.
Oh, wonderful. I'm sure when you said when you used the word nuisance animal, that was mostly conflict-prone species.
Yeah, but nuisance in the sense, I mean, that would be their terminology at that time. Today, it would have been like
it
a more
the terminology.
I mean, a more sensitive terminology would be a conflict animal.
Yeah, yeah. So the other thing which really impresses me about the state is the natural history records the palace has maintained, the Mysore state has maintained. So the archives of Mysore Palace has wonderful literature about, including about distribution of certain species. Like I remember the Mysore Wildlife Preservation Officer, Mr. Neelkant Rao, has documented the presence of nilgai, which is not which was not found in Karnataka till the last 1 year. It had gone locally extinct, but he mentions about it near Bandipur. So what do you think of that rich history which is available in the literature which is available? What do you think is the future of this kind of extraordinary literature available?
It's certainly a record for us to look back upon when we chart our way forward. It's 200 to 300 years ago. The records from that time will certainly help us understand what was and what should be if we are to again repopulate or again see what our virgin forests were if we were to repopulate that. So certainly the tree species in that, and then what animals were present, especially those that can be relocated back, we can look into, such as the nilgai. You even had records in the mid 1800s that there were cheetahs here as well. So there were British East India Company records, I believe, that there were cheetahs here. So that, I mean, would be true considering, of course, how much grassland we have, which is now all agricultural land. But it points to the fact that we had a lot of flat grasslands in and around the hills and the Ghat sections beyond that. And it certainly would be very true that they were cheetahs as well. In the case of the nilgai, I remember, of course, seeing them in only in Banerghata and not beyond there, and it was only a sort of exotic for us being from Karnataka seeing them in the north, even though they are very common there, and absolutely you see them everywhere. Even if you're on a train, you'll see them. So it was good. It is in a way assuring to know that it was there, and should you find a need to reintroduce and repopulate that particular species, I think this record will show us
really
that help us to point in the right direction if we were to do that.
Wonderful, sir. Wonderful. So, sir, if I am able to ask you a very candid question, what's your favorite wildlife spot in India?
So no, I mean, I can't. Obviously, I will always lean towards our jungles here surrounding Mysore.
Yeah.
But I'm out of the environments. Bandipur has always been. I think it's a family favorite from day one. Certainly, my grandfather Maharaja Chamaraja Wadiyar preferred Bandipur and was always found to be there, and whenever he had time off. And that has, I mean, for me, even despite not knowing that from, when I was very young, always leaned towards Bandipur because the family always went there.
Went there.
I think it is a little bit more open, so to a youngster, it feels more inviting.
Okay.
And then as you grow older, the views certainly are unparalleled because you have the Nilgiris in the background.
Yeah.
And I think more than Nagarole, it's more virgin forest.
Okay.
So perhaps that is more alluring as well. Certainly, I mean, Nagarole, you see, at least the tourist sections have a lot more teak and plantations. Bandipur has always been more enthralling. And the openness, grassland is always much more endearing to me, though I love Nagarole equally.
Yeah.
One more in Karnataka, which I have always enjoyed, even though sighting animals are very, very tough, is Daroji in next to Hampi, which part of the Hampi heritage area. And that is one of the most beautiful landscapes I have seen. All along, I mean, all our sanctuaries, BR Hills is beautiful, despite now the tremendous, huge amount of lantana there. MM Hills, I've only had the good fortune of going with you a couple of times. I haven't been much there, but again, absolutely beautiful. And the riverine habitat there, I think one of the most unique ecosystems we have in India.
Yeah, true, sir, true.
So many Bhadra is obviously really, really beautiful. Brahmgiri, Kudremukh, all stunning sanctuaries. And then now I believe even Kali Tiger Reserve is one of the more pristine reserves there is now in Karnataka. So certainly leaning towards our southern ones, Karnataka tiger reserves.
Yeah.
But if I haven't been to many in the north, but certainly if I had to point out one, it would be Kaziranga because of the rhinos and then because of course the backdrop you have of the hills, or rather the mountains.
Oh, wonderful, sir. So if I again poke you a little bit more, from my various discussions with you, I realize you like certain kinds of habitats. Do you like lush evergreen forest? Do you like dry grassland, dry habitats? Or what do you like, sir? What do you like more?
So growing up here, surrounding Mysore is essentially dry grassland and even Bangalore. So that is what you've grown up in and used to it. And for sighting animals, nothing like it because you can just sit in one place and enjoy your afternoon just watching movement of animals, which is the best thing. But certainly even evergreen or our mostly wet deciduous that Nagarole is in the Coorg section of it is also very, very beautiful. And it can be even beautiful in the rain, which not many people like, but I've enjoyed many times. So I enjoy and appreciate all habitats like food and cuisine, but you like what is from your home.
Home, that's fantastic. Sir, I would like to tell my viewers also, though it's a bit sunny, the lighting may not be the best, but the setting, and we wanted to show the rich cultural heritage of this place and the backdrop. And unfortunately, this is the best lighting we could afford, but we really wanted the viewers to enjoy the rich backdrop. Sir, if I asked you a bit more about wildlife and Mysore state, your grandfather, the very progressive Sri Jayachamrajendra Wadiyar was the first chairman of Indian Board for Wildlife, and he even managed to organize the first meeting of Indian Board for Wildlife in 1952, November 1952 at Lalit Mahal Palace, which is not very far from where we are sitting now. So let's say you had an opportunity to organize another meeting of the Indian Board for Wildlife. Would you be hosting it?
Certainly be most delighted to, and I'm sure we would love to be a part of any talk relating to wildlife, given the fact that many princely houses in India across the board pretty much have conserved wildlife reserves. And of course you cannot hide the fact that it was because of our in the British era, the hunting tradition that was there in pretty much every royal family. that you understood that these forest ecosystems had to be preserved, and there was an innate love for wildlife in that sense, and it continued in modern times when you understood that we were stewards of the planet towards conservation and preserving these habitats there. So certainly that would be I think a tremendous honor if we could see that tradition move forward and happen again. And yeah, I think the first few meetings of the Indian Board for National Board for Wildlife happened here at Lalit Mahal in Mysore. The talks were more in defining our wildlife heritage. They were leaning towards, I believe my grandfather is leaning towards having the lion as the national animal. And now we know from many facts that the lion was there before the tiger in India, and certainly all of our Vedic texts and whatever we have from that era point towards the fact that the lion was the dominant predator here before the tiger came in, and certainly our emblem is also the lion. The Sarnath
emblem
pillar.
Is the lion.
The Sarnath pillar of India itself.
Emblem,
So it is the lion because that harkened back to an era when it was the dominant species here. But appropriately then I think it was Karan Singh who then became the chairman of the National Board for Wildlife, who pointed in the direction of the tiger because that was an immediate need at the time, and it is now currently, for our current time and status, the most important animal which we have to preserve when we look at all of our jungles as a whole.
I would like to also bring to the notice of our viewers that if you have any questions, the last 15-20 minutes will be dedicated to discussing with you people directly. So if you have any question to Sri Yaduveer Wadiyar, kindly type in, and we will the questions will be passed on to us at the end. So kindly you can start punching in your questions right away, and we'll be very glad to answer them. Sir, moving on about the Indian Board for Wildlife. Today, if you are hosting the Indian Board for Wildlife, what would be your top 3 points for the agenda?
Certainly, how we could, I think the primary and most crucial thing is how we can have more contiguous forests. I think linking them across India is pretty much the most vital thing if we are to preserve our population, species, and of course the DNA and the genetics pool has to be diverse enough so that we have that link across the board, north to south. Some means to a very tall task, very tall task, but nonetheless Karnataka has it all along the Ghats and all along its border pretty much. So that should be seen about how we can have that link across our country. Second thing, of course, man-animal conflict, in that sense, how we can play, the urban sphere can play a better part towards those that are in border areas and have a link and understand their issues, because often as not, we in the urban sphere, we see these man-animal conflicts and cannot comprehend how that sphere living in the border areas of the forest react in such a way to animal conflict, a tiger coming in, a leopard coming in. Many cases, especially in leopards, you see, they've been killed or been, really badly hurt. In the case of elephants, I think better interaction between those two spheres, and then sensitizing those around such border areas between the forest and where humanity exists, and how to mostly, I suppose, bring a solution towards this going forward. Alongside, and the same point would be certainly, I think, seeing the model in Africa of how they've added on. If you look at reserves such as Kruger, the game reserve, and it has pretty much doubled in size because of the add of private game reserves all along the western side, fully the western side. And this is not just in Kruger, across Africa in different countries, they have managed to implement this to great effect. And one last thing, again, this is pertaining to our forests, certainly the removal of all the alien species, lantana, Nilgiri, many Bellari, the Jali, all of those invasive species that have come in, which are I think a huge threat, and then will aid, if you remove them for the time being at least, in reducing man-animal conflict, because there will be more space within the parks to move around and feed for the animals. So that certainly is something that third point I'd like to raise.
So if I got you right, your top 3 points for the Indian Board for Wildlife, if it was hosted in Mysuru by you, would be: one is landscape connectivity, the other one would be mitigating human-wildlife conflict, and the last one would be how do we deal with invasive floral species. Perhaps I'm sure you
And
also
even
meant
even
faunal species.
even fauna as well.
Fauna as
We
well.
have the stray dog issue here,
Yeah.
which can be hugely damaging to, and even cattle coming in as
Cattle.
well,
Okay.
can be very damaging to what is virgin forest, hasn't been
Yeah.
exposed to,
Yeah.
the outside, whatever viruses, etc. might be there, so it could be very damaging.
So wonderful ways to look at how conservation can be done, and even the priorities you're setting up for a next wildlife board meeting if it happens. If the viewers are unaware, Honorable Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi was right here in this backdrop on the International Yoga Day just last month, and you're seeing the same backdrop here today on the International Tiger Day. So that shows how benevolent the Mysore state and the current royal family is also towards various social causes. It's wonderful to, I would reiterate that it's wonderful to have you here, sir. And the other very important legacy which goes with the Mysore kingdom and the state of Mysore is about the Kedda operations,
Yes.
which used to happen in Karapur, which is today Bandipur and Nagarhole Tiger Reserve on the backwaters. So, how did it end, and what's your opinion about the Kedda operations, sir?
So I believe it to be quite a long-standing tradition, because the elephant was the main means of transport, of carrying large goods, and for trade as well. So you had the Vijayanagara Empire, for example, Karnataka Samrajya, as you would say,
Yeah.
in the city of Vijayanagara had over 5,000 elephants, they said, right in the city, and the
Yeah.
famous Gajashala where
Yeah.
the Patadanes used to be.
Yeah.
So there's a huge tradition of trapping elephants in the wild and then bringing them in. Rather, tradition would be a, over simplification, but there used to be, that was the means by which you would procure this resource,
Okay.
essentially in those days what they believed it to be. And that tradition continued in Mysore. By the time the princely state of Mysore had come by, the elephant had largely become ceremonial, because railways and even the automobile had come in, for which transport and all the other practical needs were taken by machinery. Essentially, the industrial revolution had happened. So largely the Kedda was ceremonial then, because of the traditional role the elephants played. And it happened, of course, Karapur was very famously one of the locations. Even in Budipadga, there was the Kedda operations. went on,
Budipadga is
and,
in the BRT Tiger
BRT
Reserve.
Tiger
Yeah.
Reserve. And so many other locations were there where they would host the Kedda operations for capturing wild elephants to be used for the ceremonial purposes, and then even in the camp. So a lot of the forest work went on with the help of elephants.
Okay.
And so they even capturing, even to this day, if a man-eater is or designated a man-eater, it's the elephants that come in to help.
Play. Yeah.
So that tradition went on, and of course it had to be stopped because no longer a requirement.
Yeah.
And the population of elephants, and again the 60s we understood our role as planetary stewards, and our sort of past role of harnessing domesticating animals as a resource was now obsolete, and also we understood the fact that we aren't anymore in that's not the role we are going to play. We need to conserve them and let them be in the wild. So post the 60s, there weren't too many Kedda operations, and I believe the last was in Madhya Pradesh. That happened in the 80s. That was the last operation I believe to have happened. So no more Kedda, obviously, because not required anymore. And for our ceremonial purposes, the state has the old elephant camps, which breed elephants, which continue to be domesticated and used for domestic purposes. Remain relevant as much as you want to say the Sampradaya or the Parampara is written in stone. Elements of it which are interchangeable will always change with the times, and certainly in the case of the elephant, this is what has happened. It still plays a very important role in Dasara, carrying the golden howdah and our now Chamundeshwari Devi in for the Vijayatre which happens, or the Jambu Savari that happens now. So they still play a key role in our ceremonial or rather a traditional aspect of our society. Throughout Kerala they still play an active part in temples. But obviously as we go on now and understand that now machines have taken over that role, and we also understand our role as I said, planetary stewards. We have seen that we can maintain these traditions while sort of reallocating the more effective parts of it towards whatever we can, not the animals.
Okay. Many of you may be unaware of the fact that he is a keen, ardent conservationist, not in the forefront but at the background. He does a lot for conservation, and we approach him on a lot of issues, and he is very supportive of it. And that's what we think icons and celebrities like him can play a big role in their own part in wildlife conservation. They need not be a conservationist or scientist on their own, but even if they are supporting from the background and their name carries huge weight in the government and also in the society, and that's a big thing he does, and we really always look forward and expect and also bank upon his support on a lot of issues. Sir, you also come from a rich legacy of both sport and preservation of wildlife. How do you see from that background things have changed in both in Karnataka and also in India? So in this background, how do you see the future of wildlife conservation in India?
Well, I mean, just for sport, certainly that is extinct, and we are better for it as a society. As far as conservation goes and our role in it, playing in it, I would always say the urban sphere needs to understand the idiosyncrasies of the rural, and especially those living in these border areas where there is regular interaction of a megafauna on a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
And even in semi-rural sort of spheres, the leopard is present, including in Mysore, where we have a good population, in the hills, which have not caused us any trouble. And Bombay is also a testament to that, that they have no trouble with the leopards there. But certainly we have to have a more sensitization of understanding the local idiosyncrasies of those people living in those border areas, because without that you cannot solve the issue. You have to take in their needs as well, because they are the ones living it every day, and their daily needs are required them to be interacting with the forest. So that the urban sphere can definitely understand and be more sensitive to. And at the same time, we have the role to play in bringing awareness and understanding what true conservation is, and not applying laws of, say, human laws which you would to your pets or your other animals.
And we need to clearly segregate and tailor make solutions to both.
Yes, I mean, animal rights exist within where humanity exists, which is within the cities and within the rural sphere. And that is certainly a very noble aspect of what humanity has done over the years to protect, what has been from man's best friend, a dog, to every other animal species we domesticated, and giving them equal rights and understanding our role in that aspect, given the fact that our entire history has been powered for the most part by domesticating animals. But again, once you step beyond now what we delineate as forest and as for land or for wildlife or wildlife habitats, the laws there are different. So and that conservation laws demand a completely different approach. If there is a man-eating tiger, if there is a rogue elephant or a problematic animal, there is a certain process involved, and we as a society, especially in the urban sphere, who are not well averse to what is happening down there, once the process involved has gone through and you see that they are moving towards, absolutely there's no other option but to capture the animal and put it in a zoo, we cannot be opposing it or saying it while being unaware completely of the situation, being vehemently opposed to it. So I think that role of sensitizing ourselves towards what is laws for conservation and following protocol there is completely different from animal rights in a city.
So you're talking about a very pragmatic approach of how do we deal with conflict-prone animals, individual animals, rather than just looking at them as every individual species has the equal right, like 450 million livestock we have in this country, but endangered species or wildlife have a different kind of approach that we need to take, is what you're telling. That's very illuminating. It would also be nice to take one or two questions from the viewers already. We can start answering some of the questions. It will be nice to see. Okay, there's also a question about zoos, and it was also a question which was on my list. So who is this asking about zoos? Mysore has one of the finest zoos in the country, sir. And it was set up, of course, by your family itself. Um, uh, and in your opinion, and also a question which says, zoos can preserve wildlife species but affect the psychological health of animals. What is your take on this? Which I will also add to it. What role can zoos play in modern wildlife conservation?
Well, I mean, I think certainly they cannot be as they were once before capturing wild animals to put them. We had the famous movie Hatari, which I watched 1,000,000 times as a child, where they used to capture the wild animals to bring back to zoos.
Yeah.
And as romantic as that movie is, that is no longer a viable option. I think zoos need to maintain their own population.
Yeah.
And if need be, to add to maybe a reserve where there are where it's locally gone extinct, certain species which were there before, maybe the zoo can be called upon to repopulate in that species, is my personal opinion. And again, this is not a conservationist opinion, it's my own personal opinion. With regards to the Mysore Zoo, it's believed that much before there was an actual formal zoo there, there were all the wild animals received as gifts, that is pre-British era, and from many years before were housed there in the Summer Palace at that area.
One of the gifts which was received was the cheetah,
Yeah.
and it was housed in the Mysore Zoo as well.
So
The Indian cheetah, actually.
Yes. So before it became a zoo,
Yeah.
all the wild animals, as you know, a princely house would have, was housed there. Is believed to be what it was, and so they were kept there. And then it was formalized as a zoo when His Highness Chamaraja Wadiyar the 10th essentially cut down half of what was our Summer Palace in Lokranjan Mahal and dedicated to the zoo. It has some of the nicest heritage
Sorry, sir.
buildings.
So you mean to say it was a part of the Summer Palace?
It is to this day part of the Summer Palace land,
Okay.
and as per the the treaty which we signed, and the right to our property continues to be property of the palace.
Okay.
But it's used by the government for their for the purpose of being a zoo until such a time that they decide to not use it as such.
Okay. Okay.
So the many parks around Mysore, in view of preserving Mysore, the aesthetic and identity of Mysore and the nature and the parks around Mysore, this clause was added into the property list. So Nishad Bagh, Uparna Park and many other parks are in this fall under this gambit. The zoo is one of them. So it continues to be. So essentially at that time what they did was halve the Summer Palace which was there, Lokranjan Mahal, and dedicated it to the zoo. And I think to this day continues to be one of India's oldest zoos. Obviously now they're much bigger zoos where modern most beautiful zoos you'll see, and they've done tremendous steps they've taken from, I mean, I've been going there since a child, towards conserving and protecting and ensuring that wildlife, or rather the animals they have there have a good life. With regards to the animals in the zoo being having different sort of stress levels, it was the study done here. Obviously, being in the wild, you have predators, you have so many other problems that the animals have to look into. In the zoo, them having none. The elephants at least were found to have a much lower level of stress in the zoo because they didn't have to find food. Summer times are not as hard as they would be in our forests, and no predators around. So that reduced the stress level. So take that, I mean, you take that again with a grain of salt, because even we would even in jail you get fed, and you don't have to worry about anything in life, but still.
I'm sure you're looking at it from an educational perspective, but you are a person who likes animals to be out in the wild rather than...
I mean that's the same for all of us, right? We can certainly have an institution that feeds us, looks to us for every care in the world, and we don't have to do anything, but again you're jailed then. So it's the same analogy which you would use there.
Okay. Tanmay, do you want to write more questions? Meanwhile, sir, I also know that you're a voracious reader. Is there a specific book on wildlife which you really like, or a couple of books?
Personally, obviously every year at some point or the other I do pick up Jim Corbett. Just because that despite him being at first obviously learning his trade because of and being able to shoot down that many man-eaters because he was a hunter, but nonetheless if you read his books, what you see is truly probably one of India's first conservationists, and if you read his life story, etc., he worked tremendously and was one of the first people to call out, alongside a couple others, to call out the fact that if we didn't stop hunting the way we were hunting, we would finish off our population of tigers in India. So he was one of the first people to call that out, alongside, of course, in those times helping out in many cases with man-eaters where were really, really problematic.
Okay.
Famously, of course, Rudraprayag we know, which was on the famous Badrinath, Kedarnath route. From that to many, many other man-eaters which are causing a lot of issues for them locally there. Alongside that also, his ideas of conservation and his understanding of forest, and just reading and knowing how he would know how to place himself at a certain spot, knowing fully well that the animal was coming there, was something that is truly remarkable. And his way he could pretty much make up any call in the forest, from a number of birds to pretty much all the animals. And then even his idea of calling a tiger or calling a leopard, because of his, he knew what was a mating call to what was a regular everyday the calling. So it was just, I think, something remarkable.
Any other book which you have liked?
I mean, we've certainly, obviously you take it with a pinch of salt, but our local Jim Corbett is Kenneth Anderson, so you'll obviously read him to get some this thing. But again, I mean, there are many stories. And we don't need to get into that, but nonetheless, which point you in either way. We certainly read all of, not all, but quite a few of Valmiki Thappar's books. I've read some of your books as well. And it's a continuing process to just learn about conservation, and National Geographic magazine is one aspect of that as well. So magazines and books make up of certainly most of the wildlife wise reading.
So one very important part, and I also observed during our interactions, is that you like historical architecture. You like old places, and several of the inspection bungalows in the forest today are set up by your family, by the Mysore state, and beautiful structures, and some of them have been built in fantastic locations, wonderful strategic locations. Do you think that wildlife, I mean that heritage, though they are in the midst of the forest, wonderful structures, that heritage, has it been continued in your opinion?
Certainly the building of a Mysore lodge, a Mysore-centric lodge, like what is here in surrounding like Sungutkate, or what was in now with the jungle lodges in Kabini, or those are the lodges that we see in Kalkere, for example. All of them certainly were never built like that again. They were unique buildings made for lodges. They were certainly borrowed from the British tradition in Africa of building the lodges in the African wilderness, but had its own Indianness to it and Indian style to it brought in. From the use of the local materials, and then the idiosyncrasies that pervade that to crafting such a lodge. All of that was brought in. So they were very unique buildings, and I think worthy of being preserved. I've not seen very many new travelers' bungalows or IBs in that same vein post that, even if people have the good fortune of having forest land near forest, I don't think anybody has made such structures anymore. As far as conserving them, certainly even though they are in, as you said, very pristine forest areas, like Kalkere on the fire line, etc., which is its own, in a way, sort of maybe good, because it's another era and another time. So it's preserved as is, and maybe via video or some other thing you can see what it is. Not just these few structures. I mean, you have huge number of forts which are within forests. For example, if you look at what is one of the most beautiful ranges, Lokkere, Kundrekere, and all of them. There are over 11 forts there. Even
Lokkere is basically in Bandipur Tiger Reserve.
In Bandipur Tiger Reserve, and then even Venugopal Swami temple is the remnants of the fort are there. So these were all outposts of the last sort of border between Karnataka and Tamil, or the then Mysore state, or whatever Kannada state was there, to the Tamil state which was there. So the Moyar would be the means they cross over and went into the Tamil states. So there are many forts there which are you cannot say preserved, because they've been there for, it's been forest long time before, and forest long time after they were utilized as forts. But I think some means of having the video or documenting it from an architect and understanding what was there, and then leaving it to erode away to nature would be for those purposes. As far as what the forest department has as travelers bungalows, I would see them at least conserving the structures as is, and having limited utility of them so that they're preserved as is.
Sir, if I had asked you one question, is there some message you want to give out to the younger generation about wildlife conservation or anything in general before we move on to questions from the viewers?
Sure. My only message is this, is to sensitize yourselves to the realities of conservation. Just because you think it may be right in your sphere and what is humane law now, it's not necessarily that applies to the natural world or to wildlife. So I would say sensitizing yourself to that and gaining more awareness about that aspect of it is true. And then a personal request with especially the princely houses, understand that many of us, even though it was for what we understand now to be not such a noble means of sport in hunting, those reserves were preserved, especially here in Karnataka. The fact that we have such a wealth of forests came down from that heritage of understanding wildlife had to be preserved as much as early as you said from 1931, and even before there was places dedicated as wildlife reserves here in Karnataka, and we have the strongest contiguous forest apart from the northeast here in Karnataka.
Wonderful, sir. Wonderful, sir. Especially coming from your mouth about a message even to the princely states is a great message. So we have a question about reintroduction of cheetah into India by one of the viewers. What do you think about it?
I believe they're reintroducing in Kuno National Park in Madhya Pradesh. So, I mean, as much as I'd like it, from a selfish aspect of wanting to see the cheetah back in India again, and it's absolutely an amazing animal from what we see and featured so much on, every wildlife documentary. The fact of the matter is, will it be introduced like a zoo animal or will it be introduced to be wild and free? We do not have that much big contiguous grassland, flat grassland. I don't believe we don't have that much anywhere really in India, because obviously the strains of such a huge population and such a huge agrarian base, most of the grassland is now farmland. So if it's left wild, no doubt you'll see conflict between the farmers and the cheetah, and knowing fully well it isn't megafauna like the others, it will be certainly fall victim to many conflicts. And secondly, if it's just as a zoo animal where it's being conserved, like it's being fed and then left to roam free in vast land, wouldn't be as fulfilling an effort towards conserving as being wild and truly free. So it's a very tough question to answer in that sense, whether I'd obviously love it to be back in India and love it to never have gone. And the additional thing is, it's not the Indian species, not the Asiatic cheetah that's coming back, it's the African subspecies.
That's something which I also vouch what you're saying, is that we don't have such large natural habitats for cheetahs left anymore in this country, and the issue of subspecies is also there. The Asiatic cheetah is in really minute numbers. There are supposed to be only 12 left in Iran now. And even to have small founder populations of about 50 cheetahs in India, we may still require about 20 to 40,000 square kilometers of its natural grassland and scrubland habitat. So I can completely agree with you about your impression that we unfortunately don't have those natural habitats. I would also like as much to have the cheetahs in India. I also vouch with your points about having natural habitats, and also the issue of subspecies. It may be because it's so diverse, wildlife subspecies are also very diverse, of course genetically as well. We have a few more questions. Unfortunately there are lots of questions, but we would like to pick and select a few within the time sphere we have. Somebody is asking what are the steps you would suggest for tiger conservation?
I mean, given the amount of space we have as dedicated as tiger reserve, we have, for that amount of space, we have more than enough tigers. We have actually excess tigers. So if
in some of the reserves,
in some of the reserves certainly, and looking at it, I mean, I'm only aware in Karnataka we have excess tigers in certain reserves. So so that comes down to, one is removing huge swaths of lantana which our entire ranges are covered in lantana and other invasive species, will allow for natural growth of virgin forest. Thereby the herbivores come back in much larger numbers, so that then, and in much greater spheres of jungle, so that the tiger can roam, more internally and not come out.
Yeah.
And the other tiger conservation, other than that, would be again allowing either private players or the government itself adding in more land.
Okay.
Which I know it's very tough ask, because you want more land to come under revenue if the government has to gain more revenue more revenue itself. But I think dedicating more land, while not such an easy solution, certainly from private players who can have the ability to buy vast tracts of land, which India now, the wealth, there is a lot of wealth in many individuals who are wanting to contribute towards, even if it adds on 100 acres around a forest. We know now, the science says, if you continually add around a forest, it adds to its growth, rather than sort of building in the middle of nowhere, dedicating land towards a forest. So that aspect of it, I think, would be certainly something that you could add on to tiger conservation, I think, is my personal opinion, just seeing from the fact that the success stories that have happened in South Africa and many other African countries.
So is there a particular wildlife species which is currently critically endangered, let's say like the great Indian bustard in India, you would like to see it thriving, so that I know you have a very young son of 4 years old, and you would like him to see, what species would that be?
I think certainly, if you were to point to one thing, thanks, I didn't actually been aware of the entire riverine system that was you've pointed out in MM Hills that we have in Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary. So that, I think, there, and you have what is, I believe, the emblem of that area is the grizzled giant squirrel.
Yeah.
That is something I think worth, and pick and choose. Lovely to see the snow leopard.
Okay.
I haven't seen one personally in the wild, but I think that will be preserved to a certain degree because of just the landscape it lives in, but nonetheless it is facing many issues which require conservation, and that would be something, sort of really a mystical animal in that sense, worth preserving and dedicating a lot of resource towards preserving.
It's really heartening. I would have expected you to tell, I want my son to see the tiger for prosperity, but you picked a subject and an ecosystem which is critically endangered, the riverine ecosystem in Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary, or this ecosystem is very endangered in the entire country. Very few pockets of such vast stretches of riverine ecosystems, and you picked up a species which is very small, lesser known, the grizzled giant squirrel.
Well, not that the tiger doesn't require conservation.
No, I agree with you.
It requires conservation, but the tiger will be conserved.
Yeah.
There is no doubt about it, because it is our national animal, and it is the pride, and only India has a sustainable tiger population world over. No one else has that in the wild, in its natural habitat that has been. So the tiger will be conserved, there's no doubt about it. It's just, is there dedicating enough space towards them? And we'll know soon enough.
No, that's what is very heartening, is that you picked a species which is lesser known, doesn't have the kind of publicity it needs, like the tiger gets or many other charismatic species gets. So it's really heartening to see that you're picking a species and a landscape and an ecosystem which are so critically endangered, but very lesser known by the world itself. So I will take a last question, sir, before we unfortunately have to close this session, as much as I would have loved it to continue. So we have a question where our viewer is asking, what are the best ways to coexist with wildlife and forest edge dwelling communities?
Well, so quite not so easy to answer, is straightforward to answer. So wildlife communities in and around the forest, again, this idea of being planetary stewards, they aren't aware of. For them, that is the forest, and this is their livelihood here. And it's day to day, their existence is pretty much, they require a resource, the forest as a resource. And we have come in with our laws and put it in that they cannot go in there and live their traditional lives, which is a tough ask, and a different. So most of the communities living around are former tribal, formerly tribals, still designated as tribals, but now being re-amalgamated into our world. So their existence from time immemorial has been in the forest and with the forest. So how do you, firstly, their entire tradition and their entire identity, how do you ensure that that is preserved, but at the same time the facilities of what the modern world gives them are available to them and not to be abused or anything in that sense. So that is, I think, the key aspect that we have to look into, and how they can continually be in touch with the forest if they wish to be, but at the same time adhering to some of our conservation laws, which no, obviously they cannot be trapping, they cannot be utilizing animals for or rather hunting as they would for their food source before. So all of these aspects need to be looked into in those communities bordering a forest area. As far as, of course, the animal conflict for the farmers there and everything, again, you understand their plight because that is their livelihood. If the elephant eats up, or say even somebody farming chilies, if a number of peacocks come in and completely remove 2-3 acres of chilies, you can understand their their plight. That's a good amount of revenue for them going to waste. There's livelihood as well. So these are very unique problems that we have to look into. Monkeys cause a huge problem for our areca farmers. Many issues like that. You can keep on naming them. Wild boar are in and around Mysore. Wild pigs create a lot of issue for farmers. So how do you understand to curb all of this and at the same time preserve what is the pristineness of the wildlife, at the same time their livelihood as well?
Very nice, sir. If there was something else which I have missed, or if you would like to add to our viewers, please go ahead.
No, nothing much. It's been a pleasure to sit here and talk to you about wildlife. It's always something that I don't need any second thought about doing. It's truly I think a privilege to be here in Mysore, and to a certain extent even Bangalore, having so many wildlife reserves so near us, maybe 4-5 hours from Bangalore and just a couple hours at most from Mysore, if not closer. So it's truly, I mean, part of every person in Mysore will have some affinity to wildlife or some knowledge about it, and it's really, I think, great that we get to continue to talk about this. And even though the more you get into conservation, the more you see it as sort of a losing race, I think it's one worth fighting. In the end, anyway, nature will win. So it's just a matter of whether we want to go along for the ride, or face ourselves with multitude of issues and even extinction of what we have built as humans if we are not to coincide and collaborate with nature.
So thank you so much. It was thank you again for
it's been a pleasure
participating and also hosting us right in front of the
not
palace.
at all, please.
And thank you, all of you. That was for you, Sri Yaduveer Chamaraja Wadiyar from the Maharaja of Mysore Kingdom. A fantastic conservationist, very interested not just in conservation but also in art, history and heritage. And if you ever get a chance, you should listen to him talking about various histories of this southern Indian part especially. He's got a wealth of knowledge of Indian history as well. Thank you again, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. Pleasure.